One of the things that we're going to do, as we have done in the last two, with Angela Smith's, wherever she is, permission, because it works so well, was the exercise part. If we can do that, it's on, you're on your own, no pressure, but we've always had a good time with it. The idea, of course, is to just get our bodies, keep our bodies in motion and awake. And so one of the things that we have tried in the past that has also worked very well is that after every speaker, and we can practice after me if you want, everybody stands up and applauds just for a little bit, just to kind of move their body out of their seats and so on. Is that pretty much, Angela, the way we planned it in the past? Yeah. All right. So that's pretty much it. Judy, are you prepared? Ready? Okay, Judith Heerwagen, everyone.
I haven't spoken yet. How do we get to my thing? I don't want to tell you about my trip to the Nature Center. It was policemen on the metro, got to the wrong side of the campus, etc. Okay, what I'm going to do is sort of set the context for what we're talking about today. This is sort of a new approach to what we've been doing with these conferences. This is the third one in the series. But what we're looking at now is looking at how do you go do research and go from data to design. That's the theme of this conference. And if we look at this, we build buildings for one purpose only. That is to house people in their activities. And if you look at this, this is an evolutionarily novel approach to living. We now live in buildings as our natural habitats and not outdoors. And I think we really need to think, what are the consequences of doing this? And this is a slide you probably have all seen or heard of. It's a study done by the Harvard School of Public Health, and it was actually replicated in Canada recently. And what we know now is that people spend about 93% of their time indoors or in transit to and from indoors, and only 7% outside. And what does this mean? What it means is that we are now an indoor species. And if you look at the consequences of that for us, every single one of you in this room probably spends the majority of your time sitting at your workstation, looking at a computer. We are now hunting and foraging for information rather than flora and fauna. We live and work in, particularly work in buildings that are completely controlled. Temperature is controlled, kept at a constant level. Lighting is controlled for the most part. We sit at our computers, and often we have no access to natural light or to views to the outdoors. And the most changed of all is the social environment. We now communicate electronically, for the most part. Our iPhone is our best friend. And psychologists are beginning to understand the consequences of this, not being able to read people's expressions anymore. We can't read facial expressions as well. Young children are coming up not knowing how to communicate as well as they used to because we do it solely by electronic means now. Even when we're with our best friend, we're still on our real best friend phone. So we really have to look at what does this mean, and this is what we're going to talk about a little bit today, are the consequences of this. We don't really know. We know a little bit, emerging evidence. All the speakers are going to talk about some of these things, but we really can't put it together in terms of a program of approaching how we deal with health in buildings. Most of the focus has been on risk reduction, absolutely necessary, but very little on how do you use the building to actually promote health, not just get rid of risks. And one of the things we know is there's not a whole lot of funding for this area. This was a study done by Mara Baum several years ago when she was a Ginsberg Fellow at USGBC. USGBC wanted to see how much funding there was available for sustainable buildings. And what they found was that of all the federally funded research in this country, 0.2% went to research on buildings. And the vast majority of that was for energy. There was no mention at all about health-centered research related to buildings. NIH, of course, had a huge health budget, but it wasn't focused on buildings in any way. So this is what we're looking at. How do we begin to increase the funding here? How do we begin to sort of develop a collaborative program across agencies and so forth? So that's one of our goals for today, is to look at that issue. But I think this makes it very timely because we're at a point where we're really looking at a new era of research that is aided by technology, by wearable, portable technologies that can be used to really understand the links between people and the environment in real time. You're going to hear about a couple of studies that are doing that. And I think what we're also beginning to hear is that this is really linked to organizational mission. Being able to stay healthy, work well, and so forth has consequences for how well an organization does. And a really good example of that is a recent study that was done by the Harvard School of Public Health looking at the impacts of CO2 and ventilation level on complex cognitive functioning. And what they found was that when the levels of ventilation were increased and CO2 went down dramatically, that people in this study actually did much better, 300% better on cognitive tests than people who were even at the level of what is recommended in the standards. And this was a protocol that was developed by business schools. So it was looking at your thinking methods, not just doing silly tests that psychologists often do, but really looking at how you think and how you use information. That is mission critical. That is the kind of stuff we're looking at. And that's what's going to convince people to do these things that we're finding out are really important to do. So what we want to do is sort of lay the foundation for that. But I think we're at a point in time where this stuff is going to make sense to people. But we have to package it well. We have to tell people why it's important to them. And that's the translational component here. We can do all the research we want. If it sits in medical journals, it does no good in the world. It really has to get into practice. That means reaching designers, reaching building operators, reaching a lot of people that we don't normally think about. So that's part of our translational thing that we're going to talk about today also. And we recognize that having healthy, happy, productive people is really critical to mission. So this is part of what we're doing. How do we create the context for people to be happy, healthy, and productive? And how do we then use that to actually talk about how do we link to mission effectiveness? So today's agenda is the first session is looking at the new research frontier. The second session will be looking at how do we link wellness to environmental experience. What are the kinds of methods we're using? What are they telling us? How do we actually do something with the data? Because a lot of this data, it's going to be enormous amounts of information. How do you use data analytics and big data to actually begin to pull out the real relationships, the important relationships, and all the information we're gathering? The next session is going to look at how do we apply that? How do we go from data to design guidance and design recommendations? This is a really critical part of this because it makes it real in the world. It makes it happen. And the last session is just looking at brainstorming. What are people hearing here? What do they think is important? What can we move forward? What are the gaps? How do we create an ideal building that is health-focused, not just risk-reducing, not just at neutral, but better than neutral? And I think that's what we're all aiming for here. So we have a few rules of the day. We have designed this specifically to be discussion-oriented. The presentations are going to be brief. They're going to present ideas, things that people are doing now, things that people are thinking about. But we really want you people engaged in this. And we want you asking questions. We want you saying what you've heard. We want you to disagree. We want you to sort of point to new directions. We don't want you just to sit there and absorb. Take notes. Think about what you're hearing, because you have an influence on where this is going and what we can do in the future. So we really, really want you engaged in this. So that's going to be how we hope we operate. And what I would like to do now is introduce our first speaker, Bill Riley from NIH. He's the director of the Division for Behavioral and Health Sciences, and he's a clinical psychologist, and he focuses on behavior, behavioral interventions for health, and importantly, on how to use new technologies, mobile and portable technologies, to begin to influence behavior and how we interact with the environment. And he's also going to talk about President Obama's new precision medicine initiative that was announced at the State of the Union speech in January, and what is NIH doing in this, because it's a really, really exciting new project and with huge consequences for how we think about medical applications at the individual level and not just one size fits all. Give them an aspirin and hope they get better. This is much more complicated than that. And Bill, thank you for joining us.